The static crackled through Marcus Chen's headphones like digital rain, each pop and hiss a reminder of the dead world above his underground sanctuary. 6 months had passed since the outbreak began, 6 months since the screaming stopped and the silence of the grave settled over America like a suffocating blanket. Marcus adjusted the frequency dial on his custom radio array, the equipment he'd salvaged from a dozen different sources, creating a technological lifeline in the depths of what used to be the Washington, D.C. metro system. The concrete walls of his bunker, reinforced with steel plates he'd welded himself, kept out more than just the cold. They kept out the walking corpses that shuffled endlessly through the tunnels above, their decomposing feet creating a percussion of death that never quite stopped. The transmission came through at exactly 2:47 a.m., cutting through the white noise like a blade through silk. Marcus's trained ear, honed by years of intercepting enemy communications for the NSA, immediately recognized the telltale signs of military-grade encryption. His fingers flew across the keyboard, running the signal through decryption algorithms he'd memorized before the collapse, before the world went dark and the dead rose to reclaim it. The message was brief, coded, and absolutely electrifying. Phoenix nests active. Supply drop Charlie 77 at grid reference. The coordinates followed, along with a timestamp indicating the drop would occur in less than 18 hours. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs as he realized the implications. He wasn't alone. Somewhere out there, beyond the maze of tunnels and the hordes of zombies that had inherited the Earth, other survivors were not just hiding, they were organizing, fighting back, maintaining some semblance of the military precision that had once made America's armed forces the most feared in the world. The term Phoenix nests suggested multiple cells, multiple groups of survivors working together rather than simply trying to outlast the apocalypse in isolated bunkers. He quickly triangulated the signal's origin point, his equipment indicating it had come from somewhere in the Colorado mountains, hundreds of miles away. The strength and clarity of the transmission suggested significant power behind it, far more than his own jury-rigged setup could produce. Marcus began recording everything, his fingers trembling slightly as he worked. This was intelligence, real actionable intelligence, and it represented the first hope he'd felt since watching the last government broadcast 6 months ago, when the president had announced that federal authority was being transferred to regional military commanders before the signal cut to static forever. The transmission continued for another 37 seconds, providing additional coordinates, frequency changes, and what appeared to be authentication codes. Marcus recognized the pattern. Someone was establishing a communication network, possibly coordinating supply drops, maybe even planning operations. The military precision of the broadcast suggested involvement from surviving armed forces personnel, people who had managed to maintain unit cohesion even as civilization crumbled around them. But then the signal began to fade, and Marcus heard something that made his blood freeze in his veins. Through his headphones, carried on the same frequency as the transmission, came the unmistakable sound of zombie groans. Not the distant shuffling he'd grown accustomed to, but close, immediate, and getting closer. The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by static, then by a sound that made Marcus's skin crawl, the wet, tearing noise of zombies feeding. Marcus ripped off his headphones and reached for the pistol he kept loaded on his desk, his other hand moving to the bank of monitors that showed feeds from the security cameras he'd installed throughout his section of the tunnel system. The screens flickered to life, revealing the reassuring emptiness of his immediate perimeter, but that didn't calm his racing heart. If zombies had found whoever was transmitting that signal, it meant they'd been compromised, possibly overrun. It also meant that the Walking Dead were still a threat even to organized groups with military training and equipment. The coordinates burned in Marcus's memory as he double-checked his security measures, testing the locks on his reinforced door and ensuring his backup power systems were functioning. The supply drop was scheduled for tomorrow, at a location roughly 40 miles north of his position. It would mean leaving his sanctuary, venturing into the zombie-infested wasteland that Washington, D.C. had become, but it also represented his first real chance to make contact with other survivors, to become part of something larger than just staying alive one more day. Marcus looked at his equipment, at the radio array that had just delivered the most important message of his life, and made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow he would leave his bunker for the first time in 3 months. Tomorrow he would discover if the underground was real, and if humanity still had a chance to fight back against the dead America above. Dawn broke gray and lifeless over the ruins of Washington, D.C., its pale light filtering through the skeletal remains of what had once been the most powerful city on Earth. Marcus Chin emerged from a hidden maintenance hatch 6 blocks from his bunker, his backpack loaded with essential supplies and his modified tablet displaying the GPS coordinates from the mysterious transmission. The streets stretched before him like a graveyard of civilization, abandoned cars creating metal monuments to humanity's final traffic jam, their windows shattered and doors hanging open like screaming mouths. The silence was absolute except for the distant sound of something metallic clanging in the wind, a lonely percussion that seemed to mark time in this dead world. Moving through the urban wasteland required a different kind of warfare than anything Marcus had learned in his years with the NSA. Every shadow could hide a zombie, every pile of debris could conceal a trap, and every sound he made could draw the attention of the infected who wandered these streets in search of living flesh. He kept to the shadows, using the skills he'd developed during 6 months of careful scavenging runs, his modified boots making no sound on the cracked asphalt. The GPS coordinates led him north, toward what had once been a thriving suburb but was now a maze of burned-out houses and overgrown yards where nature was already beginning to reclaim the works of man. The rendezvous point turned out to be an abandoned metro station, its entrance partially collapsed but still accessible through a gap in the concrete that had been deliberately widened. Marcus approached carefully, his senses on high alert, when he heard something that made him freeze in place, the sound of human voices, low and urgent, coming from inside the station. His hand moved instinctively to his weapon, but then he caught individual words, tactical communications that sounded organized rather than desperate. These weren't raiders or survivors driven mad by months of isolation. These were people working together with military precision. Marcus called out the authentication code he'd memorized from the transmission, his voice echoing in the tunnel entrance. The response came immediately, the proper counter code delivered in a woman's voice that carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. He descended into the station, his flashlight revealing a scene that seemed impossible after months of solitude, a functioning base of operations complete with radio equipment, medical supplies, and maps marked with strategic positions. The woman who greeted him was in her 30s, Hispanic, with the bearing of someone who had seen combat and lived to learn from it. "Sarah Martinez," she said, extending her hand. "Former Army medic, currently trying to keep what's left of humanity alive. You must be the signal intercept specialist our Colorado friends told us to expect." Marcus shook her hand, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work and the steady gaze that suggested leadership born of necessity rather than ambition. Behind her, he could see other survivors moving with purpose, checking equipment, studying maps, and maintaining weapons with the efficiency of people who had learned that preparation meant the difference between life and death in this new world. Sarah led him to a table where detailed maps of the eastern seaboard were spread out, marked with red zones indicating heavy zombie activity and green zones showing areas that had been cleared or were under the control of survivor groups. "Welcome to the underground," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and exhaustion. "We're not just hiding anymore, Marcus. We're fighting back and we're winning one block at a time." The transmission you intercepted was from Phoenix Command, our coordination center in Colorado. They're managing supply drops, intelligence sharing, and strategic planning for resistance cells from Seattle to Miami. Marcus studied the maps, his trained eye immediately recognizing the strategic value of the positions marked in green. These weren't random safe houses or temporary shelters. They were carefully chosen locations that could support sustained operations, connected by tunnel systems, underground facilities, and hidden supply routes that formed a network spanning the entire country. The scope of the operation was staggering, suggesting that thousands of survivors had managed to organize themselves into a functioning resistance movement while the rest of the world assumed civilization had ended. "How many cells are active?" Marcus asked, his voice barely concealing his amazement. Sarah smiled, the first genuine expression of hope he'd seen in months. 47 confirmed as of last week, with more coming online every day. "We're not just surviving anymore, Marcus. We're building something new, something stronger than what we had before. The zombies took our world, but they can't take our determination to build a better one." She pointed to a section of the map marked with multiple green zones. "Tomorrow we're conducting our first major coordinated operation, clearing a path to a National Guard armory that contains enough weapons and ammunition to supply 3 more cells. Are you ready to stop hiding and start fighting back?" The Phoenix Command Center buried deep within Cheyenne Mountain represented humanity's last coordinated effort to reclaim their world from the walking dead. 2,000 feet beneath the Colorado granite, in chambers that had once housed NORAD's most classified operations, Dr. Elena Vasquez studied patterns that could save civilization or doom it forever. Her wall-mounted displays showed real-time zombie movement data from across the continent, transmitted by underground cells who had learned to track the infected like meteorologists tracking storm systems. The data revealed something that chilled her more than the mountain's perpetual cold. The zombies were no longer moving randomly. Colonel James Wright stood beside her, his weathered face illuminated by the glow of tactical displays that showed green zones gradually expanding across a map of North America. Each green zone represented territory reclaimed by the underground, but Wright knew better than to celebrate prematurely. In his 30 years of military service, he'd learned that the enemy always adapted, and the Walking Dead were proving to be more adaptable than anyone had anticipated. "Show me the Washington sector," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never lost faith in humanity's ability to fight back, even when the odds seemed impossible. Elena's fingers danced across her tablet, bringing up Marcus Chen's sector on the main display. "Your new communications specialist has been invaluable," she said, highlighting the intelligence data that had been flowing from the DC area since Marcus joined Sarah's cell. "His signal intercept capabilities have given us a clearer picture of zombie movement patterns in the northeast corridor. Look at this." She overlaid 2 maps showing zombie positions from 3 months ago and their current locations. The pattern was undeniable. The infected were concentrating around major population centers, but not randomly. They were forming something that looked disturbingly like defensive positions. Wright studied the data, his tactical mind immediately recognizing the implications. If the zombies were developing even rudimentary strategic thinking, it changed everything about how the underground would need to operate. "What's your assessment, Doctor? Are we looking at evolution or intelligence?" Elena hesitated, knowing that her answer would influence decisions that could affect thousands of survivors. "The data suggests learned behavior rather than true intelligence. They're responding to our operations, adapting to our tactics. When we clear a zone, they don't just wander back randomly, they probe for weaknesses, test our defenses. It's like fighting an enemy that learns from every engagement." The implications were staggering. Wright had been planning Phoenix Protocol based on the assumption that zombies remained predictable, that their behavior patterns could be exploited through superior tactics and coordination. If the infected were adapting to underground operations, it meant every victory came at the cost of teaching the enemy how to fight back more effectively. "How long do we have before they adapt to our current tactics?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Elena pulled up projections based on the behavioral data, her calculations painting a picture that made the mountain's strategic importance more critical than ever. "Based on current adaptation rates, I estimate we have 6 to 8 weeks before they develop effective countermeasures to our tunnel-based operations. After that, our advantage in mobility and surprise will be significantly reduced." The silence in the command center was deafening as the implications sank in. Phoenix Protocol wasn't just about reclaiming territory, it was a race against time. Wright activated the secure communication array, his voice carrying across the continent to 47 cells that had been waiting for this moment. "All Phoenix Nest, this is Phoenix Command. Operation Phoenix Protocol is now active. You have your objectives, your timelines, and your coordination protocols. The enemy is adapting faster than anticipated, which means we need to move faster than planned. Phase 1 begins in 72 hours. Acknowledge receipt and confirm readiness status." The responses came back within minutes, each cell reporting their readiness to begin the most ambitious operation in post-apocalyptic American history. From Seattle to Miami, from Los Angeles to Boston, underground cells would simultaneously begin establishing permanent safe zones, creating a network of fortified positions that could support larger populations and more complex operations. The National Guard armory that Marcus and Sarah would be targeting was just one of dozens of objectives, each chosen for its strategic value in the larger plan to create a new civilization from the ashes of the old. Elena watched the acknowledgements roll in, each green checkmark representing lives that would be risked in the coming operation. "Colonel," she said quietly, "there's something else. The behavioral analysis suggests the zombies aren't just adapting to our tactics, they're communicating with each other somehow. Not consciously, but sharing information about our operations across vast distances. When one group learns something about our methods, that knowledge spreads to other groups, even ones that have never encountered our forces." Wright absorbed this information, his mind already calculating the tactical adjustments that would be necessary. If the zombies were sharing information, it meant the underground was fighting not just isolated groups of infected, but a connected network that grew stronger with each encounter. Phoenix Protocol wasn't just humanity's best hope for survival. It might be their only chance to win before the enemy learned enough to make victory impossible. The countdown began, and across America, the underground prepared for a battle that would determine whether humanity would reclaim their world or lose it forever to an enemy that was learning how to fight back. The Jefferson Elementary School stood like a monument to humanity's lost innocence, its red brick facade scarred by months of neglect and the desperate attempts of the living to barricade themselves against the dead. Sarah Martinez crouched behind an overturned school bus 3 blocks away, watching through binoculars as hundreds of zombies pressed against the building's reinforced doors and windows. Somewhere inside that fortress of desperation, 12 children and 3 adults had been trapped for over a week, their distress signal intercepted by Marcus Chen's equipment just 48 hours ago. The message had been brief but heartbreaking. Day 6. Food running low. Please help. 3rd floor, East Wing. We can see you if you're out there. Marcus lay flat on the roof of a nearby building, his modified tablet displaying real-time data from the microdrones he'd deployed to map the zombie positions around the school. The infected had arranged themselves in a pattern that defied their supposed lack of intelligence, creating overlapping fields of coverage that would make any direct assault suicidal. "Sarah, you need to see this," he whispered into his radio, his voice tight with concern. "They're not just randomly surrounding the building. Look at the positioning, they've left clear corridors leading away from the school, but only toward areas where more zombies are waiting in ambush. It's like they're herding any potential rescuers into kill zones." 3 miles away, Colonel Wright's tactical team waited in the abandoned metro tunnel that would serve as their primary approach route. Wright himself moved through the darkness with the fluid grace of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of warfare, his night vision goggles revealing the skeletal remains of subway cars that had become coffins for their passengers during the initial outbreak. Behind him, 8 of the underground's best operatives checked their equipment with the methodical precision of people who knew that a single mistake could doom not just themselves, but the children they were trying to save. The plan was ambitious even by underground standards, requiring perfect coordination between 3 separate teams and relying on Dr. Vasquez's behavioral predictions to succeed. Marcus would use his technical expertise to create a false signal that would draw the zombies' attention away from the school's main entrance, while Sarah's medical team positioned themselves to provide covering fire and immediate trauma care for the rescued survivors. Wright's assault team would use the underground tunnel system to approach the school from beneath, accessing the building through the basement and fighting their way up to the 3rd floor where the children waited. Sarah's radio crackled to life with Wright's voice, calm and professional despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. "All teams, this is Rescue 1. We're in position at the basement access point. The tunnel system is clear, but we're seeing evidence of recent zombie activity down here. They've been using these passages, which means they're learning to navigate underground. Marcus, how long do we have on that diversion?" Marcus adjusted his equipment, his fingers dancing across the control interface that would broadcast a false distress signal from the opposite side of the school district. "Signal goes live in 60 seconds. Based on Vasquez's behavioral models, we should have a 15-minute window before they realize it's a decoy and return to their original positions." "That's your window, Colonel." The weight of responsibility pressed down on him as he prepared to activate the signal that would either save those children or lead their rescuers into a trap. The diversion worked better than anyone had dared hope. As Marcus's false signal began broadcasting from speakers he'd hidden throughout the abandoned shopping center 2 miles away, the zombie horde around the school began to shift, their decomposing forms shuffling toward the source of what they perceived as fresh prey. But not all of them moved, and the ones that remained seemed to be the most alert, the most dangerous of the infected. Sarah watched through her scope as approximately 30 zombies stayed in position around the school, their behavior suggesting a level of tactical thinking that made her blood run cold. Wright's team breached the school's basement through a maintenance tunnel, their suppressed weapons making whisper-quiet sounds as they eliminated the few zombies that had wandered into the building's lower levels. The ascent to the 3rd floor became a nightmare of close-quarters combat in darkened hallways, each classroom they passed potentially hiding infected that could alert the horde outside. When they finally reached the barricaded door where the survivors waited, Wright felt a moment of profound relief at hearing children's voices responding to his identification code. But as they prepared to evacuate the survivors, Marcus's voice crackled over the radio with news that changed everything. "All teams, we have a problem. The zombies aren't just returning to the school, they're bringing reinforcements. I'm tracking at least 300 additional infected moving in from the north and east. Whatever's happening, they're treating this rescue operation like a coordinated assault on their territory. We need to move now or we're going to be facing 1,000 zombies instead of 100. The evacuation became a race against time as Wright's team led the terrified survivors down through the school's corridors while Sarah's team laid down covering fire from multiple positions. The children moved with the desperate courage of those who had survived hell, following the underground operatives through passages that reeked of death and decay. As they reached the basement tunnel that would lead them to safety, The sound of zombie fists pounding against the school's doors echoed through the building like the drums of an approaching army. 3 days after the successful rescue at Jefferson Elementary, Marcus Chin noticed something wrong with the underground's radio communications. Sitting in his expanded bunker facility, surrounded by the rescued children who had become unexpected symbols of hope for the resistance, he watched patterns emerge on his monitoring equipment that made his blood run cold. Someone was intercepting their transmissions, not just passively listening but actively tracking their frequencies and predicting their communication schedules. The signature was too precise, too methodical to be random interference or zombie-related phenomena. This was human intelligence gathering, and it was being conducted by someone with serious technical expertise. Sarah Martinez stood over a map table in what had become their temporary command center, studying reports from other underground cells that painted a disturbing picture of coordinated attacks on resistance facilities. In the past week, 4 different safe houses had been hit by what survivors described as organized raids conducted by other humans. These weren't desperate survivors fighting over resources. These were tactical strikes designed to capture underground operatives alive and seize their equipment intact. The attackers knew exactly where to hit, when to strike, and how to avoid the zombie hordes that should have made such operations impossible. The first direct contact came at 2:17 a.m., broadcast on the same frequency Phoenix Command used for emergency communications. The voice was male, cultured, speaking with the confidence of someone who held all the advantages in a deadly game. Underground resistance, this is the Hunter. I've been watching your operations with considerable interest. Your network is impressive, but it has one fatal flaw: you still believe you're fighting to restore the old world. I'm here to tell you that the old world is dead, and those of us with vision understand that this collapse represents opportunity, not tragedy. Marcus immediately began tracing the signal while recording every word, his equipment indicating that the transmission was coming from multiple relay points, suggesting a sophisticated communications network that rivaled the underground's own capabilities. The Hunter continued, his voice carrying the chilling certainty of someone who had embraced the apocalypse as a personal liberation. Your rescue operations, your safe zones, your precious Phoenix protocol, I know about all of it. I know about the children you saved yesterday, and I know about the armory you're planning to hit next week. I know because I've been inside your network from the beginning, learning your methods, studying your weaknesses. Sarah grabbed the radio microphone, her training as a combat medic having taught her that sometimes the best defense was aggressive reconnaissance. Who are you? What do you want? The response came immediately, laden with dark amusement. What I want is simple. I want you to understand that you're playing a game you can't win. The zombies destroyed civilization, but they also destroyed the rules that kept people like me in check. I've built something new from the ashes, something that thrives in chaos rather than trying to impose order on it. Consider this your warning: abandon your operations, or I'll show you what real predators look like. The transmission ended, but its implications echoed through the underground's command structure like shockwaves. Within hours, reports began flowing in from cells across the country, all describing similar communications from someone calling himself the Hunter. The pattern suggested a network of human predators who had been monitoring underground operations and were now making their presence known. Phoenix Command's response was immediate and chilling. 3 more safe houses had gone dark, their final transmissions indicating coordinated attacks by well-armed human forces. Marcus worked frantically to develop countermeasures against the Hunter's surveillance, modifying their communication protocols and implementing new encryption methods. But he knew he was fighting someone with comparable technical skills and possibly superior resources. The Hunter's network seemed to have access to military-grade equipment and intelligence capabilities that suggested government or corporate backing. As Marcus dug deeper into the signal analysis, he discovered something that made the threat even more terrifying: the Hunter wasn't working alone. The relay points scattered across the country indicated a network of collaborators, people who had chosen to exploit the collapse rather than fight against it. Sarah's medical station became a fortress overnight, with underground operatives setting up defensive positions and early warning systems to guard against the new human threat. The children they had rescued huddled together in the deepest part of the facility, their recent trauma made worse by the knowledge that the monsters they faced now walked on 2 legs and thought with calculating intelligence. Sarah found herself facing a tactical dilemma that challenged everything she believed about survival in the post-apocalyptic world. How do you fight an enemy who knows your every move and has chosen evil as a survival strategy? The answer came in the form of Marcus's most ambitious technical deception yet. If the Hunter wanted to play games with the underground's communications, Marcus would give him a game to remember. Working through the night, he crafted a false operational plan, complete with fake coordinates, fictional team assignments, and a phantom supply convoy that would be too tempting for the hunter to ignore. The trap would require sacrificing their current communication security and exposing themselves to considerable risk, but it was their only chance to turn the tables on an enemy who had been hunting them from the shadows. As dawn broke over their embattled position, Sarah received confirmation from Phoenix Command that the hunters' raids had intensified overnight, with 7 more cells reporting attacks or infiltration attempts. The underground was being systematically dismantled by an enemy who understood their tactics better than they understood his, and time was running out to strike back before their entire network collapsed under the weight of this new threat. The attack came at dawn, precisely when Sarah Martinez's medical team was most vulnerable during their shift change. Marcus Chen's false operational plan had worked too well, drawing the hunters' forces into a coordinated assault that targeted not just the Phantom convoy but every underground facility the Resistance had thought was secret. Through his monitoring equipment, Marcus watched in horror as encrypted emergency signals flooded the airwaves, each transmission representing another safe house under attack, another group of survivors fighting for their lives against an enemy that had turned survival into predation. Sarah's medical station, built into the abandoned subway platform that had become their sanctuary, erupted into chaos as the first explosions shattered the reinforced barriers they had constructed over months of careful work. The hunters' raiders came through multiple entry points simultaneously, their tactical gear and coordinated movements revealing military training that made them far more dangerous than desperate scavengers. These weren't survivors driven to violence by starvation or desperation. These were professionals who had chosen to wage war against hope itself. All stations, this is Phoenix Command. Colonel Wright's voice crackled through the communications array, barely audible over the sound of gunfire echoing through the mountain facility. We are under coordinated assault. Multiple breaches detected. The hunters' network is larger than we anticipated. All cells implement emergency protocol 7 immediately. Scatter and evade. This is not a drill. The transmission cut to static, leaving Marcus with the terrifying realization that even Phoenix Command, buried deep within Cheyenne Mountain, was under attack. The children they had rescued from Jefferson Elementary huddled in the deepest part of the medical station while Sarah's team fought a desperate rearguard action against raiders who seemed to know exactly where every defensive position was located. Marcus realized with growing horror that the hunter hadn't just been monitoring their communications. Someone within the underground network had been feeding him intelligence, providing detailed layouts of their facilities and operational schedules. The scope of the betrayal was staggering, suggesting that the Resistance had been compromised from within almost from its inception. Sarah grabbed the emergency medical supplies while her team laid down covering fire, knowing that they had perhaps minutes before the raiders overwhelmed their defenses. The underground's greatest strength, their interconnected network of facilities and coordinated operations, had become their greatest vulnerability when facing an enemy that understood their systems better than they did. "Marcus, we need an exit route now," she shouted over the sound of approaching footsteps and the distant moans of zombies drawn by the gunfire. The evacuation through the sewer system became a nightmare of navigation through passages that reeked of decay and death, the rescued children clinging to the underground operatives as they waded through ankle-deep water that carried the contamination of a dead city. Behind them, the sounds of battle gradually faded, replaced by the more terrifying silence that suggested their sanctuary had fallen. Marcus led the group through passages he had mapped during months of careful exploration, but even he could hear the splash of pursuit behind them, the hunters' forces tracking them through the underground maze. Dr. Elena Vasquez's voice crackled through Marcus's portable radio, her transmission coming from an unknown location as Phoenix Command's main facility went dark. "All surviving cells, this is Dr. Vasquez. Phoenix Command has been evacuated. The Hunters Network includes former government personnel with access to classified facility layouts. Our operational security has been completely compromised. Switch to Protocol 9 communication methods immediately. Trust no one outside your immediate cell until we can establish new verification procedures." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow as he realized the true scope of the disaster. The hunter hadn't just attacked their facilities. He had systematically destroyed the trust and coordination that made the underground effective. With their communication networks compromised and their safe houses overrun, the Resistance was being forced back into the isolated survival that had characterized the early months after the outbreak. Years of careful organization and planning had been undone in a single coordinated assault. Sarah's team found temporary shelter in an abandoned water treatment facility, its concrete chambers providing some protection while they assessed their losses and tried to re-establish contact with other survivors. Of the 47 active cells that had been operational just 24 hours earlier, only 19 were still responding to emergency signals. The underground had lost more operational capacity in one day than they had during the entire previous month of zombie encounters. As they huddled in the darkness, listening to the distant sounds of the city above where zombies and raiders might both be hunting for survivors, Marcus realized that the hunter had achieved something the zombies never could. He had made the survivors afraid of each other. The network of trust and mutual support that had enabled the underground to grow and thrive had been shattered, leaving each cell isolated and vulnerable to further attacks. The radio crackled with one final transmission from an unknown source, the hunter's voice carrying across the airwaves with the confidence of someone who had achieved total victory. Underground resistance, this is the hunter. Your network is broken, your leaders are scattered, and your safe houses are mine. You can hide in your holes and sewers, but you cannot rebuild what I have destroyed. The old world is dead, and those of us who embrace the new world will inherit what remains. Consider this your final lesson in survival. Colonel James Wright emerged from the hidden evacuation tunnel 3 miles from Cheyenne Mountain, his weathered face grim with determination as he surveyed the smoking ruins of what had been Phoenix Command's secondary facility. Behind him, 8 of the underground's most elite operatives moved through the pre-dawn darkness with the fluid precision of soldiers who had learned to treat every mission as their last. The hunter's coordinated assault had been devastating, but it had also revealed something crucial. His network's primary stronghold was located in the abandoned Fort Carson military complex, where the raiders had been storing the weapons and supplies stolen from underground facilities. Dr. Elena Vasquez crouched beside a portable communication array hidden beneath a camouflage tarp, her fingers dancing across the controls as she coordinated what would either be the underground's final gambit or their greatest victory. The behavioral data she had been collecting on zombie movements had revealed an opportunity that was as dangerous as it was brilliant. The infected herds were naturally migrating toward the abandoned military base, drawn by some combination of residual electromagnetic signatures and the increased human activity from the hunter's operations. All surviving cells, this is Phoenix Actual. Wright's voice carried across the encrypted channels to the 19 remaining underground groups scattered across the continent. Operation Lazarus is now active. We're going to use the enemy's greatest weapon against them, their confidence. The hunter believes he has broken us, but he's made the same mistake every predator makes. He's focused so completely on the hunt that he's forgotten to watch for other predators moving in the darkness. Sarah Martinez listened to the transmission from her hiding place in the water treatment facility, the rescued children sleeping fitfully around her while her reduced team prepared for what everyone understood might be their final mission. The plan was audacious beyond anything the underground had previously attempted. They would coordinate the zombie herd's natural movement patterns with a direct assault on the hunter's stronghold, using the infected as unwitting allies in a 3-way battle that would determine the future of organized resistance in America. Marcus Chin worked frantically with his salvaged equipment, his technical expertise now focused on the most complex communication challenge of his career. He needed to coordinate not just human forces but predict and influence zombie movement patterns across a 50-mile radius, turning Dr. Vasquez's behavioral models into a tactical weapon. The irony wasn't lost on him. The underground was about to fight evil humans by working alongside the Walking Dead, using the apocalypse itself as an ally against those who had chosen to profit from humanity's suffering. The hunter's stronghold sprawled across the abandoned military base like a fortress built from humanity's discarded dreams, its perimeter bristling with defensive positions manned by raiders who had grown complacent in their perceived victory over the resistance. Through surveillance drones salvaged from Phoenix Command, Wright watched the enemy's daily routines, noting the gaps in their security that suggested they were more concerned with keeping prisoners in than keeping threats out. The intelligence reports indicated that dozens of captured underground operatives were being held in the base's detention facilities, their technical knowledge being extracted through interrogation and coercion. As darkness fell across the Colorado landscape, Dr. Vasquez initiated the most ambitious application of her zombie behavioral research. Using a combination of sound generators, electromagnetic pulse devices, and carefully placed scent markers, she began herding 3 separate zombie groups toward converging points around the military base. The infected moved like schools of fish responding to underwater currents, their individual randomness creating collective patterns that could be predicted and influenced by someone who understood their basic drives. Sarah's team moved through the approach corridors Wright had designated, their path taking them through abandoned suburbs where the silence felt heavier than usual, as if the very air was holding its breath before the coming storm. The children remained hidden in the secure facility with 2 guards, but every other surviving underground operative was converging on Fort Carson for a battle that would be remembered as either humanity's last stand or their first real victory against the forces of predatory chaos. The first zombie horde reached the base's outer perimeter just as Wright's assault teams began their infiltration, the infected drawn by the electromagnetic signatures that Marcus had amplified using captured radar equipment. The hunters' forces found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't negotiate with, couldn't intimidate, and couldn't corrupt thousands of zombies that viewed them as nothing more than food. The defensive positions that had been designed to keep humans out became death traps when faced with infected that felt no fear and required no tactical coordination. Wright's voice crackled across the tactical channels as the three-way battle erupted across the military complex. All teams, this is Phoenix Actual. The zombies are doing exactly what the doctor predicted. Move to secondary objectives and remember, we're not here to fight the infected tonight. We're here to rescue our people and end the Hunters' network permanently. Let the dead settle accounts with those who chose to prey on the living. The sound of gunfire erupted across the base as the Hunters' raiders found themselves caught between the advancing zombie hordes and the underground operatives who emerged from the shadows like avenging spirits, their suppressed weapons creating whisper-quiet death in the chaos of the three-way battle that would determine the fate of organized resistance in the dead America. 6 weeks after the battle at Fort Carson, Marcus Chin stood atop the rebuilt communications tower that crowned the underground's new central command facility, watching the sun rise over a landscape that finally held more promise than peril. The Hunters' network had been completely dismantled, its leadership eliminated and its scattered followers either captured or driven into the wasteland where the zombies would eventually find them. More importantly, the 43 underground operatives who had been held prisoner in the Raider stronghold were now free, their technical knowledge and operational experience forming the backbone of an expanded resistance that had grown from 19 surviving cells to over 60 active groups across North America. The new communication system Marcus had designed incorporated every lesson learned from their devastating losses, using quantum encryption protocols and frequency-hopping algorithms that made interception nearly impossible while maintaining the coordination that had made the underground effective. Each transmission was verified through multiple authentication layers, and every new recruit underwent extensive psychological evaluation to prevent the kind of infiltration that had nearly destroyed them. Trust had been rebuilt through transparency and verification, creating a network that was both more secure and more resilient than its predecessor. Sarah Martinez walked through the corridors of the Sanctuary City Medical Center, the first permanent hospital established by the underground in the reclaimed territory that had once been downtown Denver. The children rescued from Jefferson Elementary had become symbols of hope for the growing population of survivors who were choosing to emerge from hiding and help build something new. Sarah's facility treated not just injuries and illnesses but the psychological trauma that had left so many survivors afraid to trust, afraid to hope, afraid to believe that civilization could be rebuilt from the ashes of the old world. Colonel Wright stood before a tactical display that showed the true scope of the underground's transformation. Green zones now covering significant portions of the continental United States where organized resistance had evolved into organized governance. The Phoenix Protocol had succeeded beyond its original objectives, creating not just safe zones but functioning communities complete with agriculture, manufacturing and education systems that were training a new generation to thrive in the post-apocalyptic world rather than merely survive it. Dr. Elena Vasquez had established the Institute for Behavioral Studies in a repurposed university campus, where her research into zombie movement patterns had expanded into a comprehensive understanding of how to manage and eventually eliminate the infected populations that still roamed the wasteland. Her teams had developed containment strategies that used the zombies' predictable behaviors against them, creating safe corridors for expansion and establishing buffer zones that protected the growing settlements from incursion by the remaining infected. The success at Fort Carson had proven that coordinated action could achieve what isolated survival never could, and word of the underground's victories was spreading through ham radio networks and survivor communities across the continent. Each week brought new groups seeking to join the resistance, former military personnel and civilian specialists who had been hiding in bunkers and safe houses, waiting for someone to prove that rebuilding was possible rather than just dreaming about restoration. Marcus received reports from cells that were no longer just resistance groups but governing councils, establishing trade routes between settlements, coordinating resource distribution, and planning infrastructure projects that would support populations in the thousands rather than dozens. The radio networks that had once carried desperate pleas for help now transmitted engineering specifications, agricultural reports, and educational curricula designed to preserve and advance human knowledge for future generations. Sarah's medical network had expanded to include research facilities where former CDC scientists worked to understand the zombie pathogen and develop countermeasures that might eventually lead to a cure or vaccine. The children who had been rescued during the underground's darkest hours were now attending schools where they learned not just basic survival skills but advanced sciences, showing that the new world being built would surpass the old one in its commitment to human potential and cooperation. The final transmission of the day came from a news cell in what had once been Seattle, reporting the successful establishment of a fishing industry that was providing protein for settlements across the Pacific Northwest. Colonel Wright smiled as he marked another green zone on the tactical display, knowing that each expansion of controlled territory represented thousands of lives saved and hundreds of families reunited in safety and hope. As darkness fell across the reclaimed territories, Marcus monitored the communication networks that now carried not just military coordination but also personal messages between separated families, trade negotiations between communities, and research data that was advancing humanity's understanding of their transformed world. The underground had evolved from a desperate resistance into the foundation of a new civilization, one built on the lessons learned during humanity's darkest hour and strengthened by the knowledge that cooperation and hope were more powerful than fear and predation. The last report of the evening came from a forward observation post monitoring the wasteland beyond the safe zones, confirming that zombie populations continued to decline as coordinated containment efforts reduced their ability to spread and reproduce. America was slowly healing from the wounds of the apocalypse, and the underground that had once hidden in tunnels and basements was now building cities that reached toward the sky, reclaiming not just territory but the future itself from the forces of death and despair.